Hey Christian, how are you?
I'm doing great, man. How about you?
I'm doing awesome. So, for the audience, Christian and I were just complaining about our respective weathers. I'm in Los Angeles and it's cold and rainy again today. And I was telling him that we've had a very rainy couple winters. And of course, not of course, but he's from Illinois. So, of course, he knows real bad weather. So my brother and my dad went to Notre Dame in Indiana, which is
Oh
south of
yeah,
you. I don't know if the weather's better in Indiana or not, but you know they call Chicago the Windy City for a
yeah.
reason. I've been there once, and it was so cold. It was the coldest cold that I've ever felt in my life.
It can get pretty cold here. Yeah, and actually Notre Dame's not that far from where I am. So like seasonally, it's about the same. We get the same kind of weather. This year, it's actually been pretty awesome because there's been like maybe a day or two where it's been below freezing. Like the rest of the time, it's been above 32 into the 40s, which is pretty rad.
Okay, and that's unique to be out
It's
of the
it's
freezing.
really unique.
All right, well, enjoy it while it lasts.
Things.
Okay, so for those of you listeners who do not know Christian, he is an Illinois hairdresser who focuses on cutting and education. And I've spent some time looking into you, and I really enjoyed your Instagram. On Instagram, you're Christian Awesome, which is how you've branded yourself. Christian Gayton is your last name. Did I pronounce that right?
Yes.
So, but Christian Awesome is kind of how you navigate within the industry, which I think is great.
Yeah.
And your website and everything has you as Christian Awesome. So we're going to call you Christian Awesome.
Right on. Thank you.
All right. So let's start with where you're from and how you got into this business.
I'm from Kankakee, Illinois, which is about an hour south of the city. That's not where I live currently, but I grew up out that way, and I got into the industry through music, actually. I was playing in a band for a number of years, and just kind of like traveling and playing shows and being all over the place. It was kind of hard to hold down like a steady job, and so I was looking for some flexibility, something to supplement my income. Because it gets kind of expensive when you're replacing guitars and drum heads and things like that. And I was already kind of cutting hair in friends' bathrooms and basements and things like that in between shows, and so I kind of thought, why don't I get into hair? It's flexible, it's creative, it's kind of parallel to entertainment and the music industry, and it'll be a really good way for me to stay busy when I'm home, but also kind of give me something to I can record an album or I can pay for this or that. And maybe about halfway through cosmetology school, I was like, this is really awesome. It's a ton of fun. I'm meeting some really cool people. It showed me kind of like a side of the industry that I didn't even know exist because before this point, I had only ever gone to the barbershop with my dad when I was a kid. The rest of the time was just kind of cutting hair with your friends and your friends cutting your hair. And so I thought to myself, if I'm going to have a real chance at this, if I'm going to make something of myself in this industry, I really need to focus on it. So I ended up quitting my band about halfway through cosmetology school, and I've been doing hair for 19 years now.
Really interesting. Okay, so I want to go back a little bit on something you said. You said that you were already kind of cutting hair in bathrooms and stuff.
Yeah.
So why were you the one who was in charge of kind of trimming, keeping everybody trimmed?
I don't really know. I mean, I think that I was probably the best at it, as good as you can be when you've got a group of people who have no idea what they're doing. But also it was fun. I mean, I think if I go back a little bit further, I did go to art school before I played music. And so I've always been a creative at heart. I went to the American Academy of Art for some time studying fine arts there, and I was always really big into drawing and painting and just using my hands in creative ways. So I think kind of the flow from art school to then music to then hair, I mean, it was always like my hands were kind of at the center of it. So I think out of all of my friends, to answer your question, I was probably the one that enjoyed it the most.
Interesting. Okay, so did you actually have shears, like proper shears, or did you just have like scissors for cutting tape and stuff?
Yeah, scissors for cutting tape. Like Fiskars, like the really big chunky ones where there's only two finger holes, one for this whole side of your hand and one for your thumb.
Right.
So they were pretty primitive haircuts.
That's hilarious, I bet.
Yeah.
But you probably enjoyed playing with it with the knowledge that there's no real consequence to giving a bad haircut to your bandmate. I mean, in some case, in some cases it might even like turn out good.
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of the times I thought that it turned out good. I mean, people were happy with it, so yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So in your background, I see a lot of art. Is that yours?
No, 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 no. Just we like to fill our space with a lot of art. You know, like I like being surrounded by just really cool, artistic, creative looking things. So we fill our house with it.
Yeah, that's cool. All right.
Yeah.
All right. So you go to beauty school, you like the people there, and you realized that this was something that you liked even more than music, and maybe a little more practical from the standpoint of actually being able to make a living at it. And so you stopped music. I'm curious, do you still play?
I do, but not seriously anymore. I mean, it's like when I've got some spare time and you kind of caught up with all the stuff you got to do around the house and around your work, then I might pick up the guitar and play for like an hour or so.
Yeah. What was
Yeah.
that your what did is guitar, was that your instrument?
Yeah. Yeah, I
Okay.
play guitar.
All right. So my son is, I'm kind of deviating from the normal path of the questions that I ask on the podcast, but I'm very curious because I have two kids, 11 and 12, and my daughter has pretty much completely failed at. I shouldn't say it that way. I think her mom and I have failed at really getting her interested in music. I mean, she likes music a lot.
Yeah.
She likes listening to music. She doesn't like playing it. Our son has been a little bit more into it. We have a piano. We've gotten him lessons. We were given a guitar. We've gotten him lessons. He's now in DJ lessons. So we're
Oh,
paying for these all sorts of lessons for him to become, or at least, explore his musical interests, and which I think is part of our role is to, support our kids in kind of discovering things and finding the things that they really love. And so he likes it, but he doesn't default to it. You know what I mean? As he's learning these different instruments, when he has 45 minutes of downtime or hours of downtime, it doesn't really matter. He doesn't default to the piano and go play it, So I don't
yeah.
know if he's really passionate about it. I mean, when there's a lesson, yeah, he goes and does it. He doesn't complain. But he doesn't seem to really have a passion for it. Does that make sense?
It totally does. And just like my 8-year-old is going through the exact same thing, and it bums me out. But also at the same time, I totally get it because when I turned 13, that was when I first told my parents that I wanted to play guitar. And so on a trip to Mexico, they brought me back this guitar, which was not the electric guitar that I was, that's what I meant when I said I wanted to play guitar. They brought me back this flamenco guitar. And I played it once and I took no interest in it whatsoever. But then at 16, when all my friends were starting garage bands, that was when I was like, this is kind of, this is what I meant. And I'm reading this book right now called Atomic Habits, and it's talking about, community and how you're more likely to pick up a habit or like take on an identity when it's the identity or the habit of the community. And reading that part of the book, it like made so much sense. It like clicked for me where I was like, oh, that's kind of what happened. That's how it went down.
Very interesting. Atomic Habits. I'm writing that down right now
Yeah.
because I'm almost done with I just finished the Elon Musk book,
Oh
and
yeah.
which was long and very interesting. So Atomic Habits. So it's peer oriented. Of course, peer pressure is the term that we all use all the time, but this is like the positive part of peer influence, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So in other
Yeah.
words, if there was a kid across the street from us who was my son's friend and he played an instrument, then my son would be more apt to find it entertaining. I mean, that makes sense. I wonder
Yeah.
how I can kind of gin that up. I mean, so much of that, it kind of has to be natural, doesn't it? Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
like the parents, we can bring people into the house, but that's, I don't know. That's weird. Okay. I got to figure that out.
Yeah.
All right. So back to the hair world. So you graduated from hair school. I'm curious, were you good at it? I mean, in terms of the other students, where did you
Yeah.
fall in terms of skill?
I thought that I was good at it. I mean, looking back on it, I probably was not very good at all. You know, in the beginning, who really is all that good? But I thought that I was pretty good at haircutting. I think that what affirmed all of that for me was that closer to the end of graduation, the school that I went to offered me a position to work there. And so I was like super stoked about it because it's my first job, you know, out of school. And it opened kind of a door of, you know, so many different opportunities in education. Where I'm from is really kind of a smaller area, and at that time the hair culture was, you know, really kind of built around these hairstylists who were legacy hairstylists. They've been doing hair for 20, 30 years. And so me being the new person, if I was going to compete in any kind of way, I knew that education was going to be kind of, you know, the path that I should take. And so having that position be offered to me before I'd even graduated kind of like helped me to kind of position myself in a place where I was like, maybe I am really good at this, you know, like maybe I've got something, and that's kind of why they reached out to me about this opportunity. So I think at the time I thought that I was good, but, you know, I also knew that there was so much more to learn, you know?
Okay, so small area you're talking about, and was this kind of like the one good salon?
The school that I went to, yeah, it was kind of like the one good school. There was, I think, 2 other schools in the area that I toured at, but this was the one that I chose because it, I don't know, had the best specs. You know what I mean? Like when you take the tour, and yeah. So
got it. Okay, so you went there. How long did you spend there?
Maybe about 11 months. It probably took me.
Okay, and was that an apprenticeship? Would you call that, or did they put you on the floor? Or how was it, was baptism by fire?
I think definitely baptism by fire. I think most of my career has kind of been like that. You know, my first time teaching was baptism by fire. My first salon that I ever worked at, you know, where I'm from, the salons down there didn't have a training program at that time. And so I didn't go through any kind of training program. So when I first started working behind the chair, it was like I got hired on day one. And it was like, here's your first haircut. And I remember that first haircut, and it was a lot of just kind of guessing as I went, you know?
Okay, so I'm that happens a lot, right? That happens. That a salon needs hairdressers because there's an empty chair, and they get somebody new out of school, and they throw you in there, and then the client comes in, and who knows what kind of service you're going to have to do? Who knows if you're going to know how to do it? So what is that like? What is that like? So, like, do you remember some of those early services that you were like, I don't know how to do that?
Yeah, I totally do. There's one that comes to mind all the time. It's terrifying, but also at the same time, you know, I'm looking at this like a learning experience, you know, and I remember this one time specifically where I had this client and she had curly hair, and I didn't know anything about curly hair. You know, like I'm cutting it, taking these sections, and I'm kind of piecing together this shape, you know, section by section, hoping that it's going to sit, you know, the way that we both kind of agreed upon during our consultation. And I finally get to the haircut, and the haircut actually looks, you know, somewhat like what we had been aiming for. But the blow dry part of it, I didn't have a diffuser. I didn't know what a diffuser was. So I'm like cupping the hair in my hand and blowing the hair. You know what I mean? It's just soften like the airflow. And I remember I looked at her at a point and I was like, I'm doing the best that I can. And she just kind of laughed because we're both just sitting there like, what the hell is going on here? You know?
Oh, wow. So she knew. Yeah. So she knew. Oh, yeah. She's. Did you sense that she was losing confidence?
Yeah, but it wasn't like I remember it not being like there wasn't a conflict. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't oh, you know, you're messing my hair up or anything like that. It was just kind of like, okay, this is sweet. You're a sweet kid, but I don't think I'll come back. You know, she was a little older, and I was like 19 at the time, so you know, it was one of those situations where it was like without the physical part, it was like you're doing the best you can, kid. Don't worry about it.
That's very, very funny. So he just patted his head for the listeners who are not watching this. That's really funny and terrifying, and I've heard the story many, many times. But I just couldn't imagine. All right, so you were there for 11 months. Why did you leave?
Well, I mean, the program was 11 months. I was at that salon for probably about maybe 3.5 years, and I left because I got an opportunity to work at the pharmacy school in Chicago. And so I
Okay.
took that opportunity, and that moved me into the city. I think that I always knew that I wanted to be in the city anyways. And so this opportunity kind of coming up was like my sign to be like, okay, I need to leave home. I need to move to the city. Hopefully when I get to the city, it's going to be a different world. There's going to be all these different, opportunities and people to kind of really show me like what it means to be a hairdresser. This was my thought process at that time. And so I moved.
Okay. So that was exciting for you. They offered you a job. It's an employment situation,
Yeah.
and you were going to be an educator. They wanted you to
Yeah.
educate. Okay.
Yeah.
And so what is the process of moving from a behind the chair hairdresser to a full-time employed educator at a hair school? Do they run you through a training program?
Yeah, they do. They run you through a bit of a training program. I mean, by the time that you work in a school like that, you have to go through like a whole different series of different classes in education. You have to get your hours the same way that you would if you were going to cosmetology school, except this time to get your license as an educator. And so I had already done that before. So moving to the city, I already had my license to be able to teach in a school. So by the time I got there, the school hadn't taken on. They were brand new. They hadn't even opened the doors yet. So there were no students enrolled. So for the first 3 or 4, maybe 6 months, we were just creating our curriculum, our lesson plans, making sure that all the moving parts kind of fit how they were supposed to, so that by the time we did enroll students, it was a well-oiled machine and there wasn't any lag or gaps.
Got it. And I'm sure that there was a structure that was in place from other Paul Mitchell schools, and then you
Yeah.
guys kind of within that structure developed the curriculum. That's super interesting, and probably a great experience to have that, that time to
Yeah.
work on that and kind of get yourself in the mindset of being a full-time educator. All right, so the place opens, and what was that like?
I mean, it was exciting. I mean, it was probably one of the coolest times I think in my career. Just the energy of being in a place from the very beginning, before the doors are even open. I worked there for about 8 years. So for the first 8 years of my career, I worked in education, that's really where I honed my skills as an educator. I mean, because it wasn't just there's a lesson plan and you teach. It was that every single day I had practice in my communication skills and how to structure a lesson plan and how to vary the way that you teach so that you can hold a person's attention for, a 3-hour time period, and how different people learn in different ways. And so if you want this person to learn, then you've got to make sure that there's some sort of a part or an activity that appeals to them. But if that person learns a different way, then you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But then also the technical aspect, like my job was cutting hair. And so for 8 hours of the day, I was cutting hair over and over and over again, and really just like beating down those habits until they became, just intuitive. You know what I mean? Yeah, it was an
And
awesome thing.
you're working off doll heads with the students there watching, right?
Yeah, in a lot of cases. And then in some cases, like I might pick a student or two and do like a visual demonstration. And that's just, what happens in the classroom. I mean, when you're out on the floor and the students are taking clients, well, then you're kind of doing hair through your students, because they have zero experience and you have a lot of experience. And so if they've got to cut a bang or a face frame, or if they've got to highlight, on this client who's in their chair, they don't know how to do that, so you're kind of working through them. You're working through their hands, and so you get all that added experience onto it as well.
Right. It's like doing 10 haircuts at the same time, right?
Yeah, it is.
Through other people.
Oh, it's crazy. It's a really crazy experience. And so I'm doing that, and I was probably working at that school for maybe a year before I decided that I really missed working behind the chair. And so I ended up getting a job at a salon in the evening. So I would work all day at the school, and then I would do, more hours in the salon after school. So I was working, like 12, 13-hour days for
Wow.
probably the first, I would say, 8 or 9 years of my career.
Very interesting. So did you build up a little book by that
I
time?
did.
You'd been there for 8 years, yeah. So it made sense to work part-time somewhere. That's really, really interesting. Okay. So and then when did you leave the school? Or maybe I should say, Why did you leave? You left after 8 years. Why did you leave
Yeah.
the school?
I left the schools because, so at this point, it's probably maybe like 2014 to 2015. And I don't know, I got to a place where I felt like I wanted to shift gears. I wanted to get out of education and I wanted to spend more time and more focus on just developing myself behind the chair. At this point, one thing that I should add is that I made a transition from working full-time as a teacher, part-time as a hairstylist, to working full-time as a hairstylist and part-time as an educator. And
Okay.
so I'm in the salon full-time, and I hit kind of a wall, to be honest with you, because one of the things that happens to you as an educator is a lot of the times as an educator, you're working in an incubator of perfection. All the models are chosen specifically for you to do this look. All of the situations are lined up specifically so that you can get to this outcome, okay? When you leave that environment, you're working behind the chair, the person in the chair, the client, right, doesn't necessarily care about the years of time that you spent perfecting this bob or, all the awards and the accolades that you've accumulated. They just want to make sure that their bangs don't look jacked up. And so I had a really hard time when I made that transition to working full-time. And so I kind of decided, let me leave education and let me just dive all into just hair. Let me be a hairdresser that works full-time behind the chair. And
On
so
normal people, not models.
normal people and not models so that I could master that too. And so that was why I left about 2014, 2015. I left to work full-time behind the chair, but it didn't last long. I mean, education called back to me, and I was approached by Evo to work as a haircutting educator for them. So I took them on probably about 2016, 2017, and I was back working, full-time as an educator and part-time, or full-time as a stylist and part-time as an educator for them.
Got it. And so that had you traveling around, I imagine?
Oh yeah, a ton. Yeah, I had me traveling around a ton. But I wasn't new to that because when I was working for Paul Mitchell, I worked my way up to what they call their advanced academy, which is where I was traveling already throughout the school network, teaching their learning leaders or their teachers the haircutting curriculum. So I was teaching educators, educating educators essentially.
Yeah. Got it. Very interesting. Okay. So fast forward to where you are now. What are you doing now?
Yeah.
What's your proportionate split of your time between education and behind the chair?
My proportion split, so I'm full-time behind the chair now. I split my time between two salons, one in the city and then one in the northwest Indiana suburbs. So I do that 5 days a week, and then on the weekends I work as an independent educator from salons who find me through various networking that I've done working for other brands in the past, or that find me on Instagram and TikTok. And then I would say maybe like once or twice a month, I create content that I put up on my education platform through Patreon. So I'm still working a ton. I haven't learned to slow that down at all. But working full time behind the chair and then as an independent educator.
Yeah, very interesting. And so, what's your split between Chicago and Northwest Indiana?
I'm in Chicago 3 days a week, and then in Northwest Indiana 2. Yeah.
Okay. So your clients in Northwest Indiana, I imagine, do they recognize how lucky they are to have a hairdresser like you there?
I think they do, yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a really cool community out there. The hair scene out there is really awesome. I would say that in terms of just like the demographics, like it's really no different than in Chicago. But I think that's just because of the internet and how great of an equalizer it's become, I feel like everybody everywhere wants the same thing and we're all seeing the same stuff. And so, yeah, I think so.
It's very interesting. Okay, so tell me about the pricing differences. I imagine you charge more in Chicago?
Yeah, I do. And I feel like that's just, I feel like one of those things that kind of comes with the territory, if you know what I mean, like cost of living, and I feel like just the demographics and the price points are just a little bit different, but they're not super far off.
Mm-hmm. And do you have two different places to sleep in these cities?
No, actually, where I live right now is like right smack in the middle. So it takes me 30 minutes to get to the city.
Oh.
It takes me 30 minutes to get to Northwest Indiana.
Got it. Interesting.
Yeah,
Okay, that makes a lot of sense because
The
I
two
didn't have
salons-
a geographic image in my head. I was thinking this might have been maybe like a 5-hour drive, maybe between those
No.
two salons. But okay, that makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Something that you have on your website that I found interesting that you have written, and I'm just going to read the quote. I believe in
Yeah.
hair cutting to your hair type, texture, bone structure, and maintenance level. Everyone will cycle through different shapes and styles throughout their hair journey. I specialize in finding the ones you were meant to wear. So
Yeah.
talk about the key principles when you're trying to figure out the best look for a client.
Yeah. All right. I would say so. The key principles really kind of boil down to so every person in the chair, they go through several different haircuts in their lives, right? And there's ones that they loved and there's ones that they didn't love for whatever reason. And I think that one of the things that I've always loved learning about is this concept of suitability, right? And it's I've always been frustrated in that you take a class and an educator would talk about suitability and they might give an example or two, but there's no real like structure. There's no framework that you can say, well, let me buy a book or let me listen to a course or let me talk one-on-one with a person about what their thoughts on suitability is. And to think that I think the reason for that is because suitability, unlike the fundamentals of cutting hair, is really passed down to a person, right, from hairstylist to hairstylist. It's really a matter of taste. And it's not as loose and as squiggly a concept as I think that sometimes it's presented as. I think that it can be structured and it can be formatted in a way that makes a lot of sense. And I think that if I go all the way back to art school, right, taking fine arts classes, taking anatomy and physiology classes, one of the things you learned is that there are patterns that repeat themselves over and over and over again in the human anatomy, okay? And when you become aware of those patterns, then you can use them to create haircuts at lengths, at shapes, on textures that just make your eyes go, that's an awesome freaking haircut. Do you know what I mean? It's the same way that the rule of thirds works in photography, or the whatever different kinds of like formats and things like that you can kind of apply to this. There's just certain things that make your eyes happy and certain things that don't. And so
Right.
when I cut hair, I can't cut hair a lot of the times, kind of like taking into consideration things like suitability. Like there are certain lengths that you can cut a person's haircut that will make your eyes happy, and there are certain lengths that won't. And there are certain parts of your facial feature and your bone structure that if a component or a part of your haircut sits at that point, it'll make your eyes happy. And there are certain ways that you can structure and you can put weight in a haircut horizontally that will sit parallel along certain reference points that, when you do that, it makes your eyes happy. And so I think that there isn't one perfect haircut for every person. There's usually like 3 to 5. And so what I like to do is kind of figure out what those 5 are and then just cycle you between those every time you want to make a change. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so the longer that I can work with a person, the more that I can figure out what their daily habits are, what their no-goes are, what they like about their hair, their maintenance level, how frequently they want to get in, how much work they're willing to put into their hair. Then I basically can kind of zero in on those 3 to 5 different looks, and then we just cycle between those.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. And are you pretty active in suggesting changes to your clients, or do you kind of solicit feedback from them as a guide for when to suggest a change?
Yeah, I think a little bit of both. I think that it really just depends on where you're at in your relationship with a client. I think the very first time someone sits in my chair, there's walls up, whether we know it or not. We don't really know each other yet, and so I think that the more that I can get to know you, the easier it is for me to kind of gauge what your comfort level is and what you're open to and what you're not open to. And then I can kind of like steer, in that kind of direction until we can find something that just kind of makes sense. So for some people, they might not have, they might have a little bit of walls up and the trust is not there yet. And so I'm kind of more following the dance, right? And then there's some people who they have open trust in me, like they know that I know what's up, and so I'm leading the dance then. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I'm completely comfortable taking the lead and following. It makes no difference to me as long as the person in the chair is feeling awesome.
That makes sense. So these days behind the chair, in the last month or whatever,
Yeah.
versus let's say 3 years ago, are you seeing any differences in styles? I mean, it seems like we've been in kind of the trendless trend,
Yeah.
for a number of years. People kind of gravitate to, their looks, and that's kind of what they do. And it might be modernized a little bit, but we don't quite have the trends that you might think about if you think back to maybe the 1980s or whatever. You might not even be young enough to know that, but I'm sure you do. What are you seeing behind the chair these days as far as style?
I think it's a lot of what you just said. It really is trendless. I don't feel like trends have the same power over all of us that they used to. I think that because of the internet and how much access to information everyone has, people nowadays, I feel like, are intuitive enough to know, I look like this and my hair looks like this, and so I'm going to look for things where those people have hair and who look like me, And so the type of work that I'm doing, I feel like, is so much more diverse, because if you have awesome curly hair, you're bringing in me models of people that have awesome curly hair. If you have like really pin straight hair, then you're bringing me pictures of people that have pin straight hair. If you've got, a natural red tone to your hair, then you're bringing me, you know what I'm saying? And so, I think that the type of work that I'm doing is so much more kind of all over the place.
Any changes in client behavior as far as just like anything you're noticing?
Yeah, I think that people, when it comes to styling specifically, people want to lean into their texture more. And what I mean by that is specifically, how can I get my hair to look the raddest in the fewest steps possible? Do you know what I mean? And I think that you're seeing that in things like, the dryers with the brush kind of built into it, with things like heatless styling methods. Like, you're seeing kind of that stuff, and those trends pop up, more in styling, I feel like, than in hair cutting. So yeah, like, how can I make my hair awesome in the fewest steps possible is kind of the one that I feel like I'm seeing the most. But I feel like that's the one that I enjoy the most, because as someone with really long hair, I want my hair to look as rad as possible in the fewest steps. You know what I mean? So it just kind of makes me feel.
Yeah, it's so interesting. As we're talking, I'm listening and I'm thinking about pop culture, and the pop culture has changed, and where we get our culture has changed so much in the last, let's call it 10 to 15 years, whereas before it was largely what we saw in magazines or online. You see a celebrity or whatever, or you watch the Grammys, and so much is driven by what you're seeing on the actors or the musicians and so on. But now social media is in there competing with that, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking about all of those kind of high-profile people who historically have driven pop culture, and they still do to some degree, but less. And you've got, and even amongst that kind of group of people, you have those who have the more natural thing going, and then you have those who are almost like avant-garde every time you see them. There's some insane looking thing. And everyone is kind of spread out and doing what they want. And I wonder, that's probably, you probably enjoy that more versus, and again, I don't know if you're old enough, but were there ever times in your career where there were just 5 haircuts and everybody wanted to do, or let's say from a color standpoint or whatever texture standpoint, everybody wanted straight, or everybody wanted a perm, or everybody wanted this, or everybody wanted that?
Oh yeah, for sure. At the start of my career, I mean, I started doing hair in 2004. So at the start of it, when everybody was flat ironing their hair, or you were doing like the stacked bob, or for color it was like the Kelly Clarkson like chunky highlights. Like, I remember doing those the first 2 or 3 years of my career, and so yeah, it was a lot simpler back then. You probably only really needed to learn like a handful of haircuts and you'd be set for life. Where now I do feel like the stakes are a lot higher for hairstylists starting out now, because you really do kind of have to know a little bit about everything. Because you have no idea what's going to come in the door,
or just specialize, and maybe
Yeah.
maybe now there used to be one corner, and
Yeah.
now there's four corners, and each corner is like a subset of services, right? Let's say
Yeah.
one corner is like kind of straightening more fine hair, shorter
Yeah.
cuts or whatever. Another corner is more textured hair and long waves or whatever.
Yeah.
And so, do you find that hairdressers are specializing in these corners a little bit more
Yeah.
than in the past?
I think that they are, and I think that that's awesome, to be honest with you, because I feel like for myself, for example, right, I would say that I specialize in hair cutting. And I think that because of my background, like I really do specialize in hair cutting, meaning that anybody can come in and with whatever haircut they want, and I can get you there, right? But what I won't do is platinum blondes, right? So no one's going to come to me and want me to do a platinum blonde because I'm not going to be good at it because I don't enjoy it. And so I feel like it should be that way, to be honest with you, in that,
Yeah.
you should want to go to somebody who's going to really, really love doing what you want them to do. Do you know what I'm saying? Because that's when you're going to
Right.
get the best result.
Right. Right. What are you seeing on the gram these days? We don't talk about, at least I haven't talked about Instagram that much in the
Yeah.
last, I call it, I don't know, 40 episodes or whatever. We touch on it now and then, but certainly not as much as we talked about it 5 years ago. But
Yeah.
what are you seeing on the gram these days?
It's hard. It's hard for me to answer that question because I'll be completely honest with you. I have structured my online consumption, I guess, to be as minimal as absolutely possible. I think that when it comes to social media, whether it be TikTok or Instagram or YouTube or whatever, you're either spending a lot of time consuming stuff or you're spending a lot of time creating stuff. And I think that
Yep.
I'm in the place right now mentally where I want to create as much as I possibly can, and I don't really want to spend a whole lot of time seeing what's happening or what's going on, because a lot of the times that ends up influencing our behavior in ways that are not the best.
Very interesting. It reminds me of something that my brother told me years ago. My brother is an aspiring musician. He's an architect professionally, but has been a musician for most of his life. And I remember hearing one of his songs and thinking, he sounds just like that guy. And I'm losing the name now, but he has a very particular sound. But anyway, I said to my brother, so do you listen ever to this guy? And he's like, no, I don't listen to music. And I'm like, whoa, really? Like, he's like, I don't want any influence, anything to
Yeah.
influence what may naturally come out. And and that's maybe an extreme version of what you're talking
Yeah.
about. But I thought that was very, very interesting. Now he's probably changed that
Yeah.
perspective because I mean, hard not to listen to any music as a musician, but and I imagine also in the creative process, if you feel stuck, then going and listening to music or
Yeah.
going onto the gram and finding somebody who is really inspiring behind the chair with the work that they're posting is probably a pretty good way to jostle yourself out of getting stuck.
Yeah, that's true. And when that does happen to me, I have, do you know how you can, on Instagram, you have your favorites feed? I have maybe about a dozen or so creative accounts, some of which are hairdressers, but others like tattoo artists and chefs and things like that. And I'll go in there and I look at my favorites feed when I really want to blow some steam and kind of get, a burst of creative, inspiration. I'll go and I'll check that out.
I'm curious. Would you mind telling us who?
Let's see. Actually, one of my favorite hair cutters to follow is Bo Bollinger out of Dallas. He's an awesome haircut, and I love the way that he thinks and looks and talks about hair cutting because it's not just about hair cutting, and that's what I really like about it. So he's one that's definitely in the favorites feed. There's a couple of different tattoo artists that are in there. There's some music accounts that are in there. None that I can think off the top of my head, but
Yeah.
I try to keep it as varied as possible because if it's only about hair, then that's the only influence you're
Right.
getting, and that you end up kind of looking and sounding like everyone else, and I think that you don't really want to be in that place because then who stands out? You know what I mean?
Right. 100%.
Yeah.
What is the most difficult conversation that you've ever had with a client behind the chair?
Oh, That's a good question. I don't know if I've ever had a really, really, truly difficult client conversation. Maybe just, I would say, clients that are in like really bad places in their lives. Those are really tough, I feel like, because I don't, I've never really been the best at really heavy emotional conversations like that. And so I feel like those can always get a little bit dicey because I don't know where to go from here, or like what to say from here, or like what if I
Okay.
say the wrong thing and it sets you over
Right.
the edge, or like what if, you know what I mean? What if
So
I give somebody
what do you
advice that's bad
say?
advice? I mean, there's just one instance that I can think of where it was pretty heavy. You know, the client kind of told me something that was really heavy, and I was in the middle of a haircut or a color, and you know, the color's got a process, and you know, at first I'm being like really, really like into it, like sympathetic, and like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, that's so terrible, like. And then I stepped back and I had to ask another one of my coworkers what they would do, what they would say, because I was like, I need some kind of guidance, like I need some
Oh
kind
my
of framework
gosh.
to be like, okay, how do I get back to this person, you know,
Yep.
without sharing as many details. And you know, she overcame it, and she's been a client of mine for 10 years now, and so it turned out really awesome. I guess I didn't say the wrong thing, which is really cool, but it's stuff like that. Yeah, it's stuff like that that's, I feel like, the hardest kind of conversations to have. I mean, we always have conversations about like, hey, I don't know if this color is going to work for you. I don't know if this kind of haircut's going to work for you. I feel like that stuff is a walk in the park compared to, you know, I had a loss in the family, or I had, you
Yeah.
know, I got laid off from my job. Like that stuff is always really hard for me because I don't ever really know, like, how do you make somebody feel better at the lowest point of their life? I feel like it's kind of
Yeah.
a hard one, you know?
Yeah. And in this industry, we get a lot of that, right? We get a lot of
Yeah,
that. There's a safety in the chair that has always been there, and the those behind the chair are oftentimes subject to things that are highly emotional, and yeah, I want to call it baggage because you know some of it's positive. You know, you see weddings and you hear about you know good things and kids being born and happiness and all that, as well as the negative things.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So there's sometimes I think I've done a couple episodes. It's been a couple of years actually. I might want to go back into the library and look, but I think I've done some episodes on how to kind of protect your mental health when you kind of are getting this barrage of you know, let's say half of your clients are putting all sorts of, you know, weighty things on you. And, you know,
yeah,
some of us are better at compartmentalizing that than others. You know, some people, if they run into somebody who's in a bad mood, it puts them in a bad mood for the rest of the day, right?
yeah, yeah, totally.
All right. If you could wave a wand and change anything about the industry at all right now, what would it be?
Oh man, you know what? I can tell you one. I think that because because we're so big into like this community and this oneness, you know, hairstylists. It creates kind of this feedback loop where probably the majority of the accounts that you follow as a hairstylist are other hairstylists, right? And so we all kind of start to sound the same, and the topics that we talk about are the same, and the way that we take our pictures is the same, and the way that we, you know, format all of our captions and our profiles kind of sound the same. And I feel like the, when I start really paying attention to other hairstylists, I feel like a lot of times we're talking to each other and not to the person that we want in our chairs. And I know that that's a really big pain point for a lot of hairstylists is how do I get more clients in my chair? How do I get more people to come back? And that isn't coming from scarcity because there's millions and millions of people in this country who need their hair done. In fact, I feel like we're in a place of so much abundance in our industry right now that I feel like the reason is because nothing stands out. Like we're not communicating effectively enough to the person that we want in our chair. And I feel like I wish that I could wave a magic wand and everybody will wake up and be like, oh my gosh, I'm talking to other hairstylists in the same way that all hairstylists talk to other hairstylists. I really should be figuring out what the person I want in my chair wants from me and then appeal to that. And I feel like we'd be so much happier. Like people would be so much busier behind the chair.
I love that. I think that is
Yeah.
such a great response. And we get in trouble sometimes as an industry when we get a little bit too much on our high horse or
Yeah.
too much into like charge your worth, things like that.
Yeah.
And I'm not implying don't charge your worth, but sometimes in order to find some strength to, create those boundaries that we need professionally with our clients, sometimes
Yeah.
we get a little bit too zealous in
Yeah.
in maybe holding those boundaries. And I'm speaking very arbitrarily right now, or abstractly, but I
Yeah.
think I think the listeners can understand what I'm saying. We've had some pressures. We've had inflation pressures the last few years. So people and our industry is not good at raising their prices, right? So
Yeah.
it's been important to send the message through the industry that you have to increase your prices, because if you don't, you're actually making less money every year. But then I hear about some people who go too far with their prices, and then
Yeah.
there's a backlash with that. But, everybody has their own particular subjective circumstance, and they need to make the judgments based on that. But I really like what you had to say there. Do you have any hair horror stories?
Um, let's see. Aside from the curly haircut that I did at the start of my career, yeah, I do. I mean, you always have kind of colors that go wrong. But there's one haircut that still keeps me up at night. And it was maybe in the middle of my career after I had already, established myself and my reputation as a hair cutting educator, right? So at this point, I shouldn't have been making mistakes like this, but I had a client come in and I was doing this really awesome, like short, stacked kind of like micro bob. And as I'm cutting it, like I'm noticing a lot of expansion, and this doesn't worry me at all, because I know you just take some weight out, you create some negative space in the right places, it can help to kind of, streamline and sort of deflate the shape. But I got a little too scissor happy, and I'm taking weight out, I'm cutting weight out, and I'm noticing that as I'm starting to work kind of on the interior, there's some strands of hair that are like, they're really rigid, and they're standing straight up. And not only are they standing straight up, but they're standing straight up through the top layers of hair that are meant
Oh,
to kind
what?
of stay over the top of them. Yeah. I mean, this was like really coarse hair. And I'm noticing, okay, it's wet, and I'm like, okay, it's happening right now while it's wet. But after I blow dry this, like that should kind of solve the issue. And I'm blow drying, the hair's getting drier, and the shape's kind of coming together. But these little strands of hairs are still poking through the top layers of the hair, and I was just like, I
Wow.
don't know what I'm going to do. So that was a pretty bad one, and the client understandably was upset. It was a mistake on my part, and I owned up to it, and I didn't charge her because I'm just like, I really screwed this up, like I don't know how I could have made a mistake like this so far into my career. But never made that one again.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's why they're so valuable. That's why difficult
Yeah.
things, horror stories, can be so valuable.
Yeah.
Do you have any last words for the community?
I don't know. It's really hard to kind of like sum up all the things that I want to talk about when it comes to hair, because with education, like one of my favorite things, it's hard to decide what I like more, working with clients and cutting hair, or working with hairstylists and helping them kind of achieve, their whatever they want to achieve in their careers. But I would say that because I'm an educator, education is really one of the most important things that you can invest your time and your money into in this career. Because no matter how far you progress, or how good you become, or how confident you are in your skill set, there's always so much more that you don't know. And so I would say, really take the time, really take as many classes as you can. Even if they're free classes, there's so many awesome resources for learning and getting to wherever you want to get to in this industry. So I would say education, and whatever kind of phrases you can kind of pile on top of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's very, very valuable. You're Christian Awesome on Instagram, and you've got online, you educate online, you've got a platform there, which is great. People can find your website from your Instagram. You also educate privately in person as well as groups in person. So you guys can check Christian out on Christian Awesome at Instagram. All right. Thanks, buddy. It's been awesome.
Thank you so much.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you again.